Hey guys, tonight, we're slipping into a time when the Ottoman Empire didn't just conquer continents, they conquered summer. You're walking the sun-scorched streets of 17th century Istanbul, and the air is so thick with heat, you could cut it with a butter knife, if that butter hadn't already melted. A donkey stumbles past carrying sacks of apricots. The air smells like spice sweat and the faintest suggestion of something impossible cold. Yes, cold. In a world with no electricity, no freezers, and certainly no 7-Eleven slushy machines, the Ottomans somehow figured out how to chill sorbet and make ice-cold rosewater drinks in the middle of a Mediterranean furnace. And not just for sultans in glittering palaces, ice mattered to bakers, beggars, mystics, and even poets. You're about to see just how far humans will go to not sweat through their robes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere warm right now, let me know your location and the local time in the comments. I want to see who's out sweating the Ottomans tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk into the maze of the Grand Bazaar, past brass lanterns and pomegranate stalls. At the edge of the chaos, you slip behind a spice merchant's cart and descend a narrow staircase. It's damp cool. You're in the past and underground. Somewhere faintly, you hear the drip of water on stone, steady, rhythmic. That's not a leak. That's history. This is where the Ottomans stored ice, tons of it, hidden beneath cities wrapped in straw, protected like treasure. The concept of cold had to be protected like a species going extinct in the desert. And yet, they did it. Historians still argue whether the earliest Ottoman ice practices were borrowed from the Persians or independently developed. But what's not debated is the astonishing scale. By the 1500s, the empire was running a seasonal cold chain from snow-capped mountains all the way to palace kitchens. Imagine trying to run DoorDash with no GPS, no asphalt roads, and your cargo melts if you're late. You probably wouldn't survive that job. But the Ottomans turned this impossibility into art. Cold became cultural. It wasn't just a treat, it was a performance. They called it buzz, a simple word with shimmering meaning. You could find it in your drink, your sorbet, even your bath. Some richer households had a dedicated buz odası, an ice room complete with marble basins and jars of fruit soaking in chilled syrup. Think of it as the ancestor of your kitchen's crisper drawer, only fancier and a lot more high stakes. And the demand wasn't seasonal, it was fanatical. By mid-July, a heat wave could bring the entire capital into a collective state of sweaty panic. Couriers rushed to the palace with urgent snow reports. If mountain stores were running low, emergency snow harvesting teams were deployed. Yes, emergency snow harvesting. You can practically hear the imperial trumpet. Summon the sleds. Even commoners participated in this strange, frozen ritual. In some towns, families would stock their own humble ice holes. These weren't romantic stone vaults. They were more like dirt pits lined with straw, shaded by trees, and guarded by an angry rooster. Still, it was better than nothing. A few slivers of old snow could turn a bowl of warm yogurt into a summer miracle, and children would sneak to the edge of the pit just to touch the cold earth. Some even believed that ice had healing powers. Cool your hands, cool your soul. The Ottomans saw cold as balance. In their ancient humoral system of medicine, cold tempered heat, calm, soothed fire. Ice wasn't just refreshing, it was restorative. Physicians might prescribe chilled syrups or iced rose infusions for fever rage or even heartbreak. Ever had a breakup and wanted to eat ice cream until you forgot your name? The Ottomans would have totally understood. Here's a fun fringe fact. One Ottoman physician swore that eating a snow sorbet under a mulberry tree at dusk would increase your lifespan and prevent betrayal. Now, did he have peer-reviewed studies to back that up? Absolutely not. But his sorbet game was probably elite. The pursuit of cold became entwined with power. Sultans didn't just want snow. They wanted the first snow, the purest snow, and the most elaborately presented snow. There are court records of servants layering ice with lavender petals and slices of green plum, all so the Sultan could taste summer and winter in a single bite. There were even color-coded sherbet charts ranking which drinks were appropriate for morning, afternoon, or a post-hammam cool-down. And yes, they were wildly serious about it. If you served the wrong sherbet at the wrong hour, you might find yourself reassigned to goat-herding duty in the Caucasus. Ice protocol was no joke, so as you sip your imaginary Ottoman snow drink, cool, citrusy whispering of pine and apricot, you start to realize something. This wasn't just about temperature. It was about triumph. You were proving that you could outwit nature, that in a world ruled by sun and sweat, you could hold a moment of chill in your hand, like a magic trick, and then you hear it another drip. Louder this time. The sound of melt. The sound of inevitability. Because even with all their genius, the Ottomans were fighting a losing battle against physics. Every bit of ice stored was ice already fading. And that sense of fleeting beauty of cold things that must eventually vanish that made ice even more precious. So tonight, as you lie there, maybe in a room that's just a little too warm, imagine yourself back in that cold chamber. The walls glisten. The air smells of earth snow and something floral you can't quite place. Somewhere above the city boils in heat. But down here for now, you're safe. You're cool. You're with the Ottomans chasing the impossible. And tomorrow, we follow that impossible journey to the mountaintops and the men who brought the cold home. You wake up with frost on your eyelashes. Not literally, of course, but it feels like it. You're riding in the darkness high above the lowlands, bundled in furs that smell vaguely of goat and old cedar. The sky is a dome of ink, the stars crisp like shattered glass. Somewhere behind you, the lamps of Istanbul flicker faintly. But you're not in the city anymore. You're in the wilds, hunting snow. Yes, tonight you're part of the Ottoman Empire's strangest logistical masterpiece, the midnight snow run. Long before anyone thought to plug in a refrigerator, entire teams of men were dispatched under moonlight to carve chunks of frozen treasure out of mountaintops. They weren't just chasing comfort. They were delivering status survival and, in some cases, royal sanity. You're bouncing along a narrow trail on a wooden sled pulled by oxen. The cargo, empty straw-lined crates and giant tongs that look like they belong to a blacksmith, not a delivery crew. And your job, should you choose to survive it, is to harvest snow. Some of the best snow, they say, comes from Uludağ, once known as Mount Olympus of Mysia. Its peak is frigid even in summer, and its slopes were Ottoman snow gold mines. The extraction process is oddly ceremonial. You dig only the purest layers, not the old crust, not the muddy melt, but the freshest snow sealed just below the surface, still kissed by clouds. Historians still argue whether these harvests happen daily or in massive seasonal events. But most agree by the 16th century, the Ottomans had formalized it. Sleds, caravans, supply managers, the whole frosty bureaucracy. Snow collection had its own job titles, including Chief of Ice Buzz Emini, which sounds like a sorbet-wielding superhero, but was actually a powerful logistical officer. You reach the summit before dawn. The air is razor-thin and bitter. Your breath curls like ribbon smoke, and then the work begins scooping, packing, sealing snow in thick felt wrappings and stacking it inside crates of straw. Every flake matters. The journey down is hotter, bumpier, and more desperate than the climb. By midday, the sun has teeth. You pass the first checkpoint, a relay camp in the foothills. The snow is repacked, weighed, and checked for melt. If more than a certain percentage is gone, someone loses their bonus, or their position, or their teeth, depending on who's doing the scolding. And that's not even the weirdest part. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some teams used to ride with hollow gourds tied around their necks, filled with honey and vinegar. Why they believed it prevented heat stroke and protected the stomach from snow demons, a totally unverified but confidently discussed hazard. One old mountain guide even insisted that eating garlic the night before a snow trip made the snow less heavy. Science, as you can see, was vibing. Eventually, you reach the outskirts of the city. Now comes the stealth. Ice arrivals weren't meant to clog the city gates. Instead, routes were timed for pre-dawn arrival. Workers would slip through side entrances, unload at secret courtyards, and vanish before the bazaar came alive. Like ghosts. Cold, sweaty, straw-scented ghosts. You watch as one cart unloads its haul into a subterranean ice pit. The snow is spread across smooth stones dusted with dry herbs to ward off spoilage, then covered with thick cloth and sealed behind timber doors. For the next several months, that snow will be carefully rationed like treasure in a vault. But here's the thing, they didn't just store the snow. They tracked its origin. Yes, like wine, a delivery labeled Uluda First Frost might be reserved for the Sultan's personal sherbet, while lesser snow, perhaps from a more southern peak, went to the kitchens or the hammam. Some nobles developed a bit of a snow snob complex. One infamous vizier once sent back a dessert because it tasted of southern melt, whatever that means. He also wore jeweled slippers and tried to ban garlic in court cuisine, so grain of snow. And let's not forget the animals. Camels, oxen, donkeys, every Ottoman pack animal worth its salt, was eventually recruited into the cold chain. Camel caravans in particular became snow haulers extraordinaire. Their steady gait and desert endurance made them ideal for carrying sealed crates along the empire's vast roads. Of course, they hated the cold. One poet described a camel grumbling like a vizier denied breakfast as it stumbled into a frosty depot. So next time you're sipping on a smoothie, remember some Ottoman worker once risked hypothermia, heat stroke, and camel drama to bring a cup of chill to someone who may or may not appreciate it. The delivery teams. They were quiet legends. They worked mostly at night, mostly uphill, mostly unpaid for overtime. And yet the system ran year after year. It was a strange, silly, brilliant dance with the elements man versus melt. And every successful delivery was proof that humans are just smart enough to outstubborn physics. As you wipe the sweat from your brow and feel the mountain chill fading, you notice something strange. One of the sled drivers is softly singing a tune, a lullaby, but rewritten to be about snow. You only catch a few lines, something about sleeping beneath the moon's cold kiss and bringing the cold back to the Fire King. It's weirdly beautiful. You realize then that these people weren't just hauling cargo. They were preserving a miracle. They were freezing a little piece of winter in their hands, guarding it like a flame, and bringing it to places that had no right to know such coolness. And as the city wakes behind you, its rooftops warming, its markets stirring, you feel a flicker of triumph. Snow has arrived, and next you'll follow it down below to the secret chambers where it waits in the dark. The air changes the moment you step inside. It's not just cooler, it's hushed, heavy, secretive. The walls sweat a little. Your breath hangs like a ghost in front of you. Somewhere far above, the sun is beating down on Istanbul's rooftops, heating cobblestones until cats refuse to move. But down here, time slows and the cold lives. You're standing in an Ottoman ice house, Buzane, an architectural marvel built for one simple but impossible task, keeping snow from disappearing. And just like everything else in the empire, it was done with flare math and an occasional goat. The space is wider than you expect. It dips in toward the center like a crater. At the very bottom, snow packed and shrouded in straw. Arched ceilings rise above like frozen waves, each curve designed not just to hold the building, but to coax the air to circulate just right. It's quiet genius. Heat rises, cold sinks, and these ancient engineers knew how to trap the latter like smug sorcerers. Historians still argue whether these ice houses were modeled after Persian yakchals, or if Ottoman architects reinvented the concept with their own twist. Either way, the result was stunning. Thick stone walls, sometimes over a meter thick, insulated with clay and natural cooling drafts, built into the design tiny air tunnels that whispered the temperature back down when things got too warm. It was like air conditioning, without electricity or any sense of mercy for whoever had to clean the straw. And the storage wasn't haphazard. Each batch of snow was logged, labeled, and rotated. High-quality snow sat near the top, easier to access for sherbets and ceremonial drinks. The lower, often partially compressed layers were used for cooling larger basins of water or preserving perishables. The very bottom was known as the melt bed, where drip runoff gathered and was drained away through a hidden channel. That runoff sometimes reused to clean palace floors. Because in the Ottoman world, even snowmelt had a job. As you tiptoe along the narrow stone ledge, you notice a rusted metal hook embedded in the wall. It's part of an old pulley system used to lower buckets down into the pit. Not just for scooping snow, but also to chill drinks or, on rare occasions, bodies. Yes, you heard that right. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. On at least one occasion, a minor court official insisted on storing his deceased pet monkey in the ice house until a suitable burial ceremony could be arranged. It caused quite a scandal. Apparently, mixing monkey corpses with the Sultan's preferred sorbet snow was considered bad form. Who knew? But the palace ice houses weren't the only ones. Istanbul alone had dozens, some public, some private, some downright extravagant. Wealthier homes had smaller versions, often connected to kitchens by a narrow tunnel, so servants could retrieve ice without exposing it to sunlight. One particularly indulgent governor in Edirne built his own ice dome behind his rose garden, complete with a marble tasting bench and room for 3 guests. Just in case he wanted to entertain someone with a frozen quince. And yet, the deeper you go into these icy cathedrals, the more you realize something. This wasn't just about practicality. It was about control. In an empire that spanned deserts and mountains, marshlands and coastlines, the ability to summon snow on command was proof that you could master the elements. You pass a scratched inscription on the stone near the doorway. It's barely legible now, but the message is unmistakable. Buzz Gibi Adalet. Cold as justice. It's half joke, half warning. You see, these ice houses had rules. Theft was punished severely. One rumor says that a kitchen boy caught sneaking snow for a personal sorbet was sentenced to 30 days of courtyard latrine duty. Not execution, this wasn't Game of Thrones, but it was enough to chill the enthusiasm of any would-be snow thief. There's another detail most people forget. These ice vaults didn't just store snow, they stored timing. Everything inside was governed by a strict calendar. Ice could be drawn for sherbets at set hours. Some chambers were reserved for religious observances, chilling rosewater for holy days, or preserving delicate sweets for Ramadan evenings. There were even superstitions about drawing ice during eclipses, thought to curse the batch with infertility or dull conversation. And then there was the silence. You feel it now. Down here, voices feel intrusive. You instinctively lower yours like you're in a cathedral. There's a weight to it, this cold. It presses on your skin, slips beneath your collar, reminds you that even in the heat of empire, there were places meant to still the breath. Even laughter felt different here if it happened at all. But not all was solemn. Some prank-loving officials were known to sneak into the ice houses and swap snow tags, causing chaos in the kitchens. One poor chef nearly lost his job after using common pit snow in a pudding meant for the vizier's daughter's engagement feast. A tragedy, truly. But the good news, the pudding was excellent. The bad news, he was reassigned to goat watching in Bursa. Again with the goats. Outside the city thrums. Bells ring, hawkers shout, and the scent of grilling lamb wafts through the air like an edible fog. But here beneath it all is the hidden heartbeat, the cold core that made summer livable and luxury taste like winter. You reach the exit, your eyes adjusting to the brighter light near the surface. A thick wooden door swings shut behind you, cutting off the cold. You're sweating again in minutes. The spell breaks, and you suddenly understand something strange. The Ottomans didn't just build a refrigeration system. They built a philosophy, a way to hold on to something that was never meant to last. And tomorrow you'll see what they did with it, starting with the sultans, the sherbets, and a little culinary power play that turned ice into influence. You smell it before you see it. A delicate sweetness laced with something floral, citrusy, and cold. Like summer flirted with spring and then chilled out in a glass. You're standing in the imperial kitchens now, Matba-e-Amire, the sacred domain of palace chefs, alchemists in aprons who wielded spice like statecraft and sugar like seduction. And at the center of it all, sherbet. Not the fizzy, rainbow-powdered stuff your cousin dared you to snort once. No Ottoman sherbet was different. Liquid poetry. Infused waters sweetened with honey or grape molasses, perfumed with herbs, fruits, spices, even flowers. Sometimes infused with vinegar for tang, sometimes thickened until it flirted with syrup. And almost always served cold. Cold was the trick, and that's where your old friend the snow reappears. Tonight you're watching a royal sherbetier prepare a drink for the Sultan himself. He's elegant, unhurried, wrapped in linen the color of saffron. Every motion is deliberate. Into a massive bowl he pours rosewater, fresh pomegranate juice, a dash of sour cherry extract, and finally spoonfuls of pristine snow shaved so finely it hisses like silk as it sinks. The Sultan drinks first. He nods once. The room exhales. Disaster averted. You may laugh, but in this palace drinks were political. Sherbets weren't just beverages, they were just diplomatic tools. A guest offered a cold sherbet was being honored. A guest offered a warm one, politely insulted. A guest refused any sherbet at all, dangerous. He who rejects sweetness, one eunuch whispered, once brings bitterness. Historians still argue whether sherbet rituals were codified law or evolving custom. But everyone agrees, get the temperature wrong and you might be stuck peeling turnips for a year. And it didn't stop with the Sultan. Ottoman banquets were icy affairs, literally. Picture this, a vast summer garden, long, low tables arranged in a crescent bowls of chilled melon apricot sherbet and rose petal sorbet arranged in perfect symmetry. Snow was not just in the drinks, it was packed around jugs to keep them cool mid-feast. Palace slaves called itzechekşiler, or drink men, moved silently between guests rotating chilled containers like seasoned sommeliers. The more snow you could afford to waste on display, the more powerful you looked. One famously theatrical vizier ordered an entire mountain of crushed ice molded into a miniature fortress, complete with tiny pastry soldiers. It lasted 3 hours before melting into glorious disaster. But for those 3 hours, he was the man. And sometimes sherbet crossed the line between treat and treatment. Here's a delightfully odd tidbit court. Physicians occasionally prescribed medicinal sherbets, dosed with spices like cinnamon, cardamom, and even tiny amounts of opium or ambergris. One prescription reads like a cocktail menu from a Persian speakeasy ad, lemon balm, clove a whisper of crushed pearl and snow enough to sting the teeth. Take before midday arguments. Take before arguments. Honestly, good life advice. And for the women of the palace, the harem, that myth-wrapped world of silk and secrets, sherbet, played a very different role. When a concubine caught the sultan's eye, she was sent a sherbet. If she drank it, it meant she accepted his invitation. If she didn't, it meant she had a headache. Or better taste. Flavor mattered here. Pomegranate meant passion. Lemon meant coyness. Rose was an open heart. No one's quite sure where mint landed on the romance scale. Historians still argue whether it meant fresh start or your breath needs help. But one thing was clear: sherbet was code, and code could be broken. One incident buried in a lesser-known court chronicle tells of a concubine who swapped her rose sherbet for almond on the night of her summons, subtly refusing a sultan's affection without openly defying him. Risky move. Strangely, she was promoted the next day. Perhaps he admired her guts, or her almond choice. Back in the kitchens, you marvel at the sheer scale of the operation. Ice fetched daily from the palace vaults, snow packed into clay cisterns, silver sherbet pitchers, chilled in advance, some crusted with delicate frost, like jeweled snowflakes. There's a rhythm to it, like a ballet, but colder. And the artistry next level. A popular summertime spectacle involved sherbet fireworks. No joke. Servants would wheel out delicate glass bottles filled with bright layers, saffron, yellow, hibiscus, red, mint, green, and shake them just before serving, releasing tiny bubbles and scent into the air. It was like aromatherapy met disco punch. You overhear one chef mutter too much cinnamon, and he'll think I'm hiding a bad melon. There's real fear in his voice. In this kitchen, taste can make or break reputations, alliances, even marriages. And yet, even with all this decadence, there was still a core belief: the cold had power. Not just to refresh, but to elevate. Warm sherbet was a crime. Lukewarm sherbet an embarrassment. Cold sherbet, that was empire in a cup. You glance around and see a young apprentice cradling a bowl of ice like it's a holy relic. He stares into it, as if hoping to divine the future. Maybe he's trying to see if he'll survive the week. You don't blame him. And while it might seem absurd to hinge social standing on chilled beverages, ask yourself, what do you Instagram when you go to brunch? That's right. Aesthetics matter. Cold has always been cool. The Ottomans just got there first. And now you follow the trail of melting footprints out of the kitchens and into the inner palace, where snow didn't just cool drinks, but tempers tempests, and sometimes treaties. The walls are closer now, tighter, quieter. You're in the inner courts, the part of the palace that smells like polished wood and incense, where the windows are narrow and everything's just a little too quiet. Even the birds seem to whisper here. This is where decisions get made, not always loudly and not always fairly. And yes, even here snow found its way in. You walk past a low table lacquered and carved with tiny tulips. On it, a covered silver bowl rests on a folded cloth. No guards. No dramatic music. But that bowl, that's political dynamite. Inside is a mixture of saffron, sherbet, crushed pistachio, and the most perfectly chilled snow in the entire palace. And it's not meant for dessert. This is a peace offering. In Ottoman diplomacy, there were no quick texts or awkward Zoom calls. There were meetings and silence, and crucially, what was served. Sherbet was a message. Cold sherbet placed just so before a rival envoy said, "Let's start fresh." Warm water. Not so much. One ambassador from Venice reportedly fainted in dramatic offense when presented with a tepid cordial during an uneasy negotiation. Coincidence, maybe. But the snow's absence was noted in the next treaty review. Historians still argue whether these sherbet rituals had binding legal weight or were just subtle tools of etiquette. But the fact remains, snow gave flavor to Ottoman diplomacy. In moments of tension, snow was summoned from the palace icehouse and carried carefully reverently to meeting rooms. The coolness of the drink helped calm voices. The sweetness encouraged agreement. And let's be honest, it's hard to yell when your teeth are mildly frozen. And then there were the bribes. Oh yes, snow bribes. See, unlike spices or silk, snow was perishable. It couldn't be stockpiled easily. That made it rare haltrem, and therefore powerful. A smart official might send a jug of chilled mulberry sherbet to a court scribe before a hearing. Not a direct payoff, just a suggestion. May this cool your pen, the note might say. Very classy, very sneaky. One fringe story tells of a provincial governor who attempted to ship an entire block of packed snow to Istanbul to impress the vizier. Unfortunately, it arrived as a box of wet straw and ruined goose feathers. He was reassigned shortly after to a delightful post guarding sheep in eastern Anatolia. There's something delightfully absurd about snow becoming a political tool in a place where summers could melt shoes. But that's the brilliance. The empire's control of the cold gave it leverage in the heat. Want to impress a foreign dignitary? Don't bother with gold, hand them a plum sherbet that actually frosts the rim. Watch them go quiet with awe, and this control extended to the harem too. Yes, again with the harem. But this time not for romance, at least not directly. There's a quiet story from the late 1600s. A senior consort known for her intelligence and her herbal knowledge used chilled infusions to soothe rival concubines before major feasts. She'd offer iced lavender water spiked lightly with clove and snow. Not enough to sedate, but enough to soften moods. Over time, she became known as the mistress of the calm cup. She never lost favor. Coincidence, perhaps. But even the jealous ones drank her sherbet. You pass a niche carved into the wall. Inside is a narrow silver pipe shaped like a vine. It's an early version of a sherbet tap, part of a hidden cooling system that linked the palace kitchens to specific rooms. Chilled drinks on demand. It's like Uber Eats, but for empire. This leads you to the Kubalte, the domed chamber where ministers met. You can almost feel the tension that used to hang here like incense smoke. The decisions made in this room shaped continents, crushed rebellions, and occasionally sparked love letters disguised as border disputes. And always, there was something to sip. Usually sherbet, sometimes water, but only if it was koksa, cold. Warm drinks in a hot room make tempers worse. Chilled drinks, they bring the tone down, force you to pause, breathe, take one more measured sip before saying something regrettable. You imagine it now, a grand vizier slowly rotating a silver spoon through his sherbet. The clink of metal against frost, the only sound in the room. Across from him, a visiting prince from Egypt shifts in his chair, waiting. One sip. A pause. Then the vizier speaks. We find your proposal refreshingly naive. Ouch. But beautifully phrased. Snow diplomacy wasn't limited to the capital either. Ice caravans, yes, literal caravans, would transport packed snow to provincial governors or foreign courts. Wrapped in straw and stored in clay, the snow could survive up to 10 days if conditions were right. These caravans were guarded, documented, and occasionally ambushed. Because yes, people once stole snow shipments. Somewhere out there is a scroll listing 10 crates of stolen snow presumed melted. One of the weirdest examples, a documented case from the late 1700s, where a Moldovan prince requested Ottoman snow for his daughter's wedding punch. The snow didn't make it in time. The punch was warm. The marriage brief. Correlation possibly. Tragedy definitely. As you leave the shadow of the domed meeting chamber, you notice something carved high above one arch, a single tulip crowned with a snowflake. Subtle, elegant, and quietly revolutionary. Because the brilliance of the Ottomans wasn't just in their architecture, their armies, or their poetry. It was in their ability to turn transience into a power. Snow doesn't last. But if you can bend it to your will, even for an hour, you've shown that nothing, not even nature, can outmatch your planning. And just when you think you've seen it all, wait until you discover what they did with frozen desserts. You hear the laughter before you round the corner. Not loud, not raucous, just the kind of polite, slightly too rehearsed mirth that echoes through palatial gardens where people wear robes too fancy to actually sweat in. You're in the royal courtyard now. Sunlight spills like syrup over carved marble fountains and shade-kissed pavilions. Somewhere a peacock is definitely overdoing it. And at the center of the courtyard, ice cream. Not the modern kind that comes in a plastic tub with half a pun for a name. No, this is dondurma, Ottoman-style frozen delight that chews like taffy and chills like snow-kissed velvet. And guess what? Just like sherbet, it was made possible by their borderline obsessive relationship with snow and ice. You spot the confectioner Anitsa Chekchi Manan with a side hustle working under a silk canopy. He pulls a long wooden paddle through a massive cauldron, folding a creamy, elastic mixture like he's taming a particularly stubborn cloud. Each motion requires muscle rhythm and something like reverence. He glances up. You're watching. He winks. Show off. This treat. It's made with a curious ingredient, salep ground orchid tuber, which gives it that stretchy, chewy consistency. But the real magic happens when the mixture is cooled, using packed snow or shaved ice. The slower the freeze, the smoother the bite. Science meets sorcery. One fun little historical side note: Ottoman dondurma was so sticky that servers used swords, not scoops, to portion it. You haven't lived until you've watched a man in a bejeweled apron wield a mini-saber to serve dessert. Historians still argue whether this type of ice cream originated in the imperial kitchens or in the hills of Kahramanmaraş, where snow was plentiful and boredom apparently rare. Either way, the Ottomans made it theirs and turned it into a spectacle. Now imagine this: a summer night banquet. Paper lanterns swaying, oud music whispering over tile, and a servant arrives with a silver tray bearing 3 scoops of rose mastic and pistachio dondurma nested in chilled porcelain bowls, each one topped with crushed sugared violets. The guest list includes foreign diplomats, royal poets, and one very sleepy sultan who perks up the second he hears the clink of spoon meeting frost. Because in Ottoman high society, frozen dessert wasn't just a treat, it was an announcement. Look what we can do with nature, it said. Look how calmly we control the uncontrollable. Ice in summer was luxury. Ice cream in summer divine. But dondurma wasn't limited to high society. Oh no. This is where things get fun. Wander down into the old quarters where street vendors set up shop near mosques, hammams, and marketplaces. You'd hear them before you saw them, banging metal lids, shouting like auctioneers spinning their ice cream canisters with theatrical flair. One vendor in Bursa was known to sing opera while twirling his ice cream like ribbon. His falsetto could chill a mango, someone once wrote. Might be an exaggeration, but you get the point. These vendors used snow packed in wooden barrels, often mixed with salt, to create a low-temperature bath that froze the mixture slowly but effectively. A clever one could keep his stash cold for hours, even under the blazing sun. If you ever asked how he did it, he'd probably wink and say magic. Or Armenian salt tricks. Depends who's asking. One fringe anecdote even mentions ice cream served during Ramadan fast breaks, if the snow held out. That rare moment when a day of spiritual discipline ended with something soft, cold, and gently sweet. It wasn't about indulgence. It was about contrast. And maybe a tiny bit of joy. But dondurma had rivals: frozen fruit pastes, paludes, made with thickened grape juice and honey-glazed nuts cooled on slabs of ice, were all part of the Ottoman dessert constellation. Some were strictly palace treats. Others trickled down through the spice routes, winding their way from Aleppo to Anatolia, flavored with tamarind, lemon, or even violet. You pass a low stone bench in the shade, and sitting there is a girl with violet-stained fingers, slurping the last remnant of a frozen fig treat off a splintered stick. It drips onto her sandals. She shrugs. The satisfaction on her face says everything. There's something deeply human about these cold treats. They're ephemeral, just like snow. You can't store them for long. They melt. They vanish. And that's the point. They exist to be savored in the moment. The Ottomans understood that. Maybe better than we do. You pause at a mosaic mural depicting a celebration, musicians, dancers, and right in the center, someone handing a child a bowl of ice cream. Not a scepter, not a sword, a dessert. Think about that. And here's a weird little wrinkle. Some scholars believe the ice cream of the era doubled as identity politics. In major cities, Armenians, Greeks, and Turks each had distinct methods of chilling and flavoring their treats. Vendors were known by regional styles. The same way you might argue over New York versus Neapolitan pizza, these folks argued over cardamom ratios and snow sourcing. Real pistachio ice cream comes from our side of the hill, one might mutter. That other stuff, goat paste in disguise. You laugh, but nationalism has started over less. And yet, despite the variety, one thing united them all: the snow. Without it, these frozen delights would have just been sweet soups. And no one builds a summer memory around soup. The Ottomans, in their layered brilliance, didn't just eat snow, they turned it into joy, into pride, into stories passed down like precious recipes. Even today you'll find echoes of this in modern Turkish desserts. That stretch in your dondurma, that floral hint in your rose sorbet. That's the empire's icy fingerprint. As the day softens into dusk, the last vendors begin to pack up. Ice scraped, barrels recovered, coins counted. One young boy lingers, hoping for a last scoop. The vendor smiles and hands him the dregs from the bowl, a swirl of melted dondurma, half cream, half dream. The boy runs off, and the snow, as always, begins to vanish. There's a hush as you step through the arched gate. Not silence exactly, more like the careful quiet of a room that was once filled with plotting. You're in the Divan-i-Humayun, now the Imperial Council chamber, where once upon a time ministers debated war taxes, poetry, and occasionally how best to keep their sherbet from turning into fruit soup. And sitting near the edge of this room is a table that looks deceptively ordinary. Wood, carved, polished to a mirror sheen, but tucked underneath a little drawer lined with thin copper plating. One pull, and voila, a chilled compartment for storing ice-cooled drinks during long, tense meetings. It's like the Ottoman version of a minibar, except you don't get charged $47 for a pistachio. This is what you're beginning to realize: cold wasn't just comfort. It was tactic. Ice showed up everywhere the Ottomans made decisions, especially in their secret meetings. When the stakes were high and voices needed to stay low, you settle into the cool echo of this chamber and imagine it centuries ago, viziers lounging like cats, the air heavy with incense and suspicion as silver pitchers of chilled tamarind water are passed around. Someone makes a joke about the janissaries' boots. Everyone chuckles. No one means it. But the real signal, whether the sherbet was cold. One of the more bizarre details you find here comes from a court scribe's notebook during a particularly heated meeting in 1668. The Kethuda deputy vizier allegedly refused his drink because it was lukewarm and insulting to the empire's dignity. He then sat silently for the rest of the session. Did that sherbet actually insult the empire? Or was he just having a moment? Historians still argue whether this was political theater or genuine beverage-based rebellion. Either way, the drink mattered, and the architecture helped. The council chamber was built with an uncanny understanding of airflow. Vents in the ceiling, marble channels beneath the floor, and cool stones pulled heat from the walls. When snow from the ice houses arrived, it didn't melt immediately. It nestled in bowls like it belonged. Here's a quirky little tidbit. Some sherbet jugs were made of double-walled glass, with compartments you could fill with snow to keep the inner liquid cold for hours. Like a 17th century thermos, but designed by someone who also painted miniatures of angels riding lions. Stylish and functional. Now step back a moment literally and wander into one of the side rooms, the smaller chambers, where junior scribes worked. They weren't sipping sherbet in golden cups. They were grinding ink, drafting decrees, and trying not to fall asleep. But they had their own cooling tricks. Earthen jars known as kupler, lined with charcoal and kept under damp cloths. These held water cool enough to stay drinkable, even refreshing in the scorching summer. And sometimes, if you were favored, a tiny lump of snow was added, stolen from the kitchens by a sympathetic servant. It was like winning the office lottery. Imagine that for a second, a young scribe barely out of training sipping chilled grape syrup while copying a decree about military campaigns in Hungary. The chill in his throat, the scrape of his reed pen on parchment, the slow drip of melted snow near his elbow. That's bureaucracy, with a twist. And it wasn't just for comfort. Cold kept people sharp. In long meetings, chilled drinks kept tempers level and minds awake. Sleepiness was suspicious. Anger was dangerous. Cold was clarity. You brush your fingers along the wall and feel a faint draft. It leads you to a corridor, the kind palace kids probably raced through when no one was looking, and it connects directly to the kitchens, another hidden conduit for snow transport. The more you explore, the more you realize this place was practically plumbed for chill. Let's not forget the timing rituals either. High-level meetings often happened early, right after the first call to prayer, or late in the day when the sun had dipped. Why cooler air helped preserve the mood. But when midday councils were unavoidable, ice was mandatory. It was rushed in from the karlakas. The snow cellars, swaddled in linen, layered in straw, kept safe like royalty. If it arrived late, the entire meeting was said to lose its balance. And this wasn't just superstition. Think about the pressure. Empires hung on what was decided in these rooms. If a vizier's voice cracked, or a prince fainted from heat exhaustion, that could change the entire course of an uprising. Or a marriage alliance, or a sugar tax in Baghdad. All because someone forgot to cool the gooseberry punch. It all feels oddly modern, doesn't it? Like when your office AC breaks and suddenly everyone hates each other. Some truths, it seems, transcend centuries. But here's where it gets deeply philosophical. To the Ottomans, snow wasn't just a substance, it was a state of mind. Coolness was decorum. It was emotional control. It was elegance. The empire believed in serenlikwum, the soothing balance of temperature and temperament. Even their language reflected this. To be cool wasn't just to be chilled. It was to be measured, calm, righteous. So when you held a sherbet bowl during a council meeting, you weren't just drinking. You were participating in a ritual of presence, a nod to balance, a silent promise not to lose your head or anyone else's while debating trade tariffs. In fact, there's a beautiful Ottoman proverb that captures this. Serin iç serin düşün. Drink cool, think cool. It might as well be the empire's entire operating manual. You step out of the chamber now, back into the corridor, feeling the lingering chill, not from snow, but from centuries of deliberately crafted calm. Every gust of air, every drop of sherbet, every bowl of plum ice was a brushstroke in a grand frosted portrait of power. And up ahead, A different kind of snow story waits one not about politics or poetry, but the everyday brilliance of keeping meat from turning into medieval jerky. You step into sunlight. The hush of marble corridors gives way to birdsong and the distant shimmer of a fountain. You're now in the outer gardens of Topkapi, once strictly ceremonial, now endlessly photogenic. And here ice was no longer just useful. It was performative. Regal. Even a little absurd. This, my friend, is where sikri notati sonton tokitum home. Snow became spectacle. You stroll past manicured hedges and date palms, making your way toward a gleaming, octagonal kiosk, the Kinta, sofa, kushku, or summer pavilion. From afar, it looks like a jewelry box exploded. Up close, the tiles glitter with blue and gold, and just beyond its arched colonnade sits something remarkable. A shallow marble snow basin, carved like a lotus. No joke. This was where the Sultan's sherbet would chill. In public view, beneath silken canopies, while poets recited verses and bureaucrats tried not to sweat through their robes. Why? Because sometimes a ruler doesn't just have ice. He flaunts it. Let's paint the scene. It's July. The court is assembled. Musicians play. Guests sip fruit drinks under embroidered tents. A servant enters bowed under the weight of a copper tray covered in a white cloth, beneath a mound of freshly crushed snow. Glistening like diamonds harvested just hours ago from an underground vault. It's spooned into crystal bowls and doused with rose syrup and tamarind. It steams slightly in the heat, melting ephemeral decadent. And just in case anyone missed it, a crier announces its source. From the northern slopes of Uludağ, carried by camel sealed in walnut ash. 7 days' journey untouched. You try not to laugh, but the drama is delicious. This wasn't just a treat, it was a flex. Historians still argue whether these snow displays originated from ancient Persian traditions or were an innovation of the Ottoman court itself. Either way, the symbolism is clear mastery over nature. The power to summon winter in summer, to cool your lips with mountain frost while your enemies sweat outside the gates. Of course, the Sultan wasn't sipping alone. Elite guests received iced desserts in porcelain tulip bowls, imported from Jingdezhen and cooled in snow-packed cabinets. These weren't sherbets as we think of them, more like semi-frozen fruit drinks or slushies. Think sour cherry, lemon, tamarind, pomegranate, even musk melon. Some were sweetened with honey, others with sugar brought in from Egypt when the empire's coffers were flush. And they were always served with a flourish: mint, sprigs, candied ginger, even gold leaf, if the occasion called for it. Here's a quirky twist. Snow was sometimes dyed. Yes, really. Court servants would steep it in crushed saffron, indigo, or hibiscus, turning the drifts soft yellow-violet or fuchsia before serving. It was called kar-a-renkli colored snow and had no purpose beyond being beautiful and completely impractical, and therefore perfect. Even more charming, some court artists painted snow presentations in watercolors, bowls of jewel-toned ice beneath filigree awnings, often attended by peacocks or tiny garden fountains, that mirrored the real-life scene. It's art about ice made with ice and served next to reflective water. Very meta. Very extra. And then there were the snow games. Wait, did you think this was all sipping and sighing? Oh no. On special days, servants and pages were ordered to stage snowball fights in front of the Sultan in July, in Istanbul. They'd bring out barrels of snow from storage, roll it into perfect spheres, and toss them across marble courtyards, while courtiers cheered. No injuries allowed, but laughter encouraged. Imagine the absurdity: palace guards in formal robes ducking behind citrus trees, flinging snow at each other while musicians play the ney in the background. You can't make this stuff up. And yet it happened. One mainstream historical fact. The 16th century Ottoman court calendar recorded over 90 named feasts and ceremonies per year, many featuring outdoor elements that relied on snow or chilled refreshments even in summer months. Logistics were wild. Timing was everything. Melting disaster. So how did they pull it off? Timing for one. Snow would be stored underground all spring and then brought out just before the event. It was often layered in ash or sawdust to insulate it on the way to the pavilion. Servants literally sprinted, so the ice arrived pristine. A melting snowball was a faux pas of the highest order. Careers ended over less. One account tells of a young page who stumbled en route, dropping an entire tray of saffron snow in front of the Grand Vizier. He wasn't punished, but he was reassigned to camel duty in Syria. Make of that what you will. And yes, there were ice chefs, specialists trained in handling, shaping, and flavoring snow. They weren't considered cooks exactly, but artists of temperature. Their job was to make sure the snow didn't melt too fast, didn't taste too bland, and looked spectacular. It was an honor. It was high pressure. It was wet work. Here's a fringe tidbit. At least one known kar ustası, snowmaster, was said to have trained under a Mongolian dessert maker who passed through on his way to Mecca. Whether that's true or just legend, it's a reminder ice knowledge traveled like spice routes and songs. As sunset dips into golden haze, you wander through the garden once more. The air is cooler now. Somewhere snow still chills in a marble bowl. Melting, yes, but not yet gone. And that's the point, really. The snow wasn't preserved for eternity. It was meant to disappear. It was luxury you couldn't hoard. Just like time. Just like favor. Just like summer itself. And as you step away from the pavilion, a soft breeze catches the scent of tamarind and mint. You smile. Because snow, you now understand, wasn't just about cold. It was about control. You turn from the gardens and descend a worn stone path that loops behind the pavilions. Fewer people walk this way. Now most modern visitors don't notice it. But in the 17th century, this narrow path led to what was arguably the most secretive part of the snow's journey. You're approaching the Imperial Kitchens, or Matba-i Amir, a vast complex of domed halls and smoking chimneys that once fed thousands. Picture ovens big enough to roast an entire ox, cauldrons that could stew a sea monster, and tiled corridors echoing with the slap of flatbread and the chime of copper ladles. It smelled of lamb cinnamon, and on hot days faintly of melting snow. Yes, even the kitchens used it, because while we've talked about sherbet and skincare and sultans showing off, ice had another grittier purpose: keeping food safe, and in an empire that spanned continents. Logistics were an art form. Let's start with the basics. Fresh fish had to be cooled. Sweet meats and dairy, absolutely. You peek inside one of the preserved cold rooms, low ceilings, thick walls, stone shelves. These weren't freezers, obviously, but they stayed cool year-round thanks to clever design and, of course, daily deliveries of snow, packed in ash and linen. One mainstream historical fact: by the mid-1500s, Topkapa's kitchens had over 800 staff members, including a dedicated team of cold storage keepers. Their job: rotate the snow, prevent rot, and above all, make sure nothing smelled off before it reached royal lips. High pressure, low temperature. This is where you meet one of our unsung heroes, the Kar Ocha Ustası. or master of the ice hearth. Yes, that was a real position. He wasn't cooking meals. He was cooking climate, monitoring the airflow, sealing the vents with fabric, and knowing exactly when to swap a linen wrap or when snow had lost its edge. Now here's the quirky bit. The cold storage team had a superstition. They believed that talking too loudly in the snow rooms would cause it to melt faster. So all conversations were whispered. That's right, centuries before ASMR was a thing, these guys were whispering sweet nothings to stacks of ice. And no, that's not the weirdest part. Some of the food preserved with snow was never meant to be eaten by humans. Some of it was ceremonial. For example, certain kinds of fruit or pastry were chilled and then placed on offering platters in the palace mosques or shrines, not just as gifts, but as symbols of transience. A dish of chilled melon in July might sit for exactly 1 hour, after which it was taken away unconsumed, its melting form meant to represent the impermanence of earthly pleasure. Historians still argue whether this custom originated in the palace kitchens or was borrowed from older Sufi rituals. Either way, it adds an eerie poetry to what would otherwise be a glorified snow cone. And here's another rabbit hole for you. Yes, diplomacy. Oh, yes. The Ottomans didn't just hoard their snow, they shared it. When visiting dignitaries came in summer, they were often served iced dishes as symbolic gifts. Sometimes the bowls were carved from solid ice and placed on silver trays lined with mint leaves. Legend says one Venetian envoy was so stunned by the gesture that he wrote home, "The Turk conjures snow from the moon." And sometimes the snow itself became a political statement. There's a famous tale, possibly apocryphal, about a prince from the Safavid court who visited Istanbul during a blistering heat wave. The Ottomans, eager to dazzle, served him one rose snow sorbet, with strands of spun sugar shaped like crescent moons. The prince reportedly returned to Persia muttering, "Their cold shames our fire." Quaint, yes. Effective. Also yes. Sometimes snow does what swords can't. You duck now into one of the ancillary kitchens, the Helvahane or confectionery wing. Here, sweetmakers worked miracles, sesame pastes, nut candies, and those icy fruit pastes, wrapped in fig leaves that everyone loved but no one could pronounce. And yes, snow was involved. There's a marble slab here gently sloped where snow was once spread in thin sheets. Over it, confectioners would pour molasses and fruit syrup, which hardened into chewy ribbons the moment it touched the cold. Snap one end, roll it up, and you've got a proto-fruit leather, but colder, and possibly addictive. Fun fringe tidbit. Some cooks swore that if you whistled while pouring syrup over snow, the flavor would sour. Others insisted it had to be done in silence by candlelight during prayer time. Superstition, maybe. But the results were consistent and delicious. Step outside and look toward the lower courtyard. That's where deliveries came in. Barrels of snow wrapped in straw and ash arrived. Every single day, from storage vaults near the Bosphorus. Some had come from the mountains, others from ice houses buried in the forests of Belgrade. Every barrel was tagged who brought it, when it was harvested, how many layers of ash it had. And guess what? There was corruption. Sometimes snow was skimmed, replaced with crushed marble dust, or packed too loosely so it melted before it arrived. Some courtiers made side deals with delivery men, swapping fresh snow for favors. It got so bad that the palace issued snow inspection decrees. Yes, actual laws about who could deliver, how snow was weighed, and what punishments awaited those who dared to fake the frost. Punishments varied. Some were fined. Others were banned from palace work. And one particularly bold forger was said to have been sentenced to coke shovel latrines for a full season, which in Ottoman heat was probably more brutal than exile. As you wander away from the kitchens, a scent catches your nose, rose mint, and just a whisper of cold stone. You realize it's the trace of a snow basin someone's just refilled. Even now, in the shadowy edges of this ancient kitchen, the snow endures. Because cooling wasn't just comfort. It was culinary art, preservation science, and occasionally a test of loyalty. If your snow failed, the food failed. If the food failed, the Sultan's wrath followed. And trust me, you'd rather face a melting glacier than an angry sultan. You shuffle toward the palace's quieter edge now, where the formal grandeur begins to unravel into the more lived-in corners of Topkapi. It's cooler here, not just in temperature, but in vibe. Fewer ceremonial tiles, more utility nooks. The kind of places where whispers lived and servants lingered. And it's here, tucked between a laundry room and a servant's dormitory, that you stumble upon something truly peculiar, the Chaum snow logbooks. Yes, logbooks. Dozens of them, bound in leather brittle with age, and written in Ottoman Turkish calligraphy, so delicate it looks like lace spun from ink. These were the empire's ice ledgers. Daily records of incoming snow deliveries, outgoing usage quantities stored, and even minor notes like melted prematurely or contains ash clumps. Why were these records so meticulous? Because snow, as you now know, wasn't just frozen fluff. It was an imperial commodity. Like oil, like gold. And in a city where summer heat could turn fresh fish into a biohazard within hours, the margin of error was razor thin. Let's open a random page together. Hachavan ma wasvan. Cheval 1130, 3 barrels from Kaathane's storehouse. 1 rejected ash layer too thin, partial melt. Remaining 2 stored in bathhouse chamber 2 lower vault. Right there in black and white, an entire bureaucracy humming around barrels of glorified mountain slush. One mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman palace maintained detailed logs for almost everything: sugar, soap, ink, even pigeon feed. But snow logs were among the most obsessively kept, because unlike other goods, snow could disappear without a trace. Accountability was icy business. Now here's where it gets even weirder. You flip a few pages and see strange little sketches, crude drawings of snow mounds, circles with radiating lines, even symbols that look like suns, half covered in shade. What are these? Fringe theory time. Some scholars believe these were early attempts at tracking melt rates, a primitive kind of refrigeration science. Others argue they were just shorthand for delivery conditions. Historians still argue whether the palace's snowkeepers were experimenting with insulation variables or simply doodling to pass time. Either way, the logs are full of these snow glyphs, and they're strangely beautiful. One in particular catches your eye. It's a perfect spiral notated with a single word, serenlik, meaning coolness. Maybe it was a good snow day. So how did they actually weigh snow? Not with scales too unreliable. Instead, they used volumetric standards. Specific barrels stamped with copper rings that were filled, tamped down, and then sealed with linen. 1 barrel meant approximately 1 kantar, or around 56 kilograms. If snow arrived in a half-melted slop, it was rejected, or docked in pay. Oh yes, snow delivery had a condition bris register. Wage system. There was a fixed pay rate per barrel with bonuses for intact snow and penalties for melt. Some routes were more prestigious than others. Bringing snow from Uludağ elite. Local forest snow acceptable. River ice scraped from the Bosphorus cheap stuff. One delivery man reportedly tried to pass off frozen laundry water. He was never seen again. Probably just fired. Probably. Here's a quirky tangent for you snow-related Conspiracy theories. Malcolm Tokum. No joke. In the early 18th century, there were whispers in the court that someone was sabotaging the ice supply, delaying shipments, mislabeling barrels, even substituting heat-retaining cloths to make snow melt faster. Why to discredit a rival vizier who oversaw the kitchens? Was it true? Historians still argue whether this was real espionage or just summer-fueled paranoia, but the palace increased guards on the snow vaults that year, just in case. And if you're thinking, they must have had snow thieves, you're absolutely right. Servants sometimes snuck snow out of storage to sell in local taverns or cool their own quarters. This was forbidden, of course, and punishable by lash or expulsion. But the temptation was real. On a scorching July afternoon, would you risk your job for a sip of chilled pomegranate sherbet? Speaking of which, snow wasn't always white. Remember that earlier bit about saffron-dyed snow? Well, in some logs, there are references to more car or purple snow. Sounds poetic, but it was dyed with mulberries, soaked in bowls and then refrozen for effect. It was rare, reserved for Ramadan nights and royal births. And it always got mentioned in the logbooks, with little hearts drawn in the margins. Yes, even imperial bureaucrats had their moments of whimsy. Let's zoom out for a second. Why does any of this matter? Because when we think of empire, we picture wars and maps and sultans with feathered hats. But the real machinery of empire, the gears that kept daily life spinning, was often deeply mundane. Things like how cold a fish stayed before it reached the royal plate, or whether the sultan's favorite drink was served lukewarm, or whether a palace fire could be doused quickly because snow had been stockpiled in the right cellar. Snow wasn't background, it was infrastructure. And these snow logs, they were spreadsheets of survival, of beauty, of status, of quiet daily rituals that sustained a civilization grander than its marble arches let on. You pause as you close the final logbook. The leather creaks. The ink smells faintly of rosewater and dust. You look up, and for a moment it feels like you're not in a forgotten corner of a centuries-old palace, but at the beating heart of something alive and human. Because really, what is more human than obsessing over how to keep your ice from melting? The late afternoon sun throws long shadows across the courtyard stones as you slip from the logbook room and into the palace's lesser-known annexes, places where ice rarely visited, but its absence was always noticed. You pass a faded wall with graffiti carved by a bored janissary, and somewhere beyond the gate a peacock calls sounding weirdly like a strangled trumpet. Here's the thing they don't tell you. Ice wasn't just used for the living. Tonight, you're about to enter one of the most unexpected chapters of this snow-soaked story, the way Ottomans used snow in death rituals, and Kokturki form. Posthumous prestige. You follow a narrow hallway that opens into a small tiled chamber, the Gasselhain, or ceremonial washing room. The scent of lavender and camphor still lingers, clinging to the stone like memory. This is where the deceased were washed, perfumed and wrapped for burial. But in summer, bodies decomposed quickly. Very quickly. So, you guessed it, snow to the rescue. It wasn't common. Snow was expensive, remember, but for high-ranking officials, scholars favored concubines, or anyone who had the Sultan's affection. Snow would be rushed in, packed around the body in linen and straw to slow decay, before funeral rites could be completed. One mainstream historical fact, in the 17th century, a royal edict was issued, allowing snow preservation of the honored dead in cases of delay. Say if a family member was traveling to attend the burial, or if the Sultan himself wanted to view the body before it was interred. Quirky fringe alert. There are at least 2 documented cases where snow preserved a corpse for more than 3 days. So successfully that mourners said the deceased looked like he had simply fallen asleep with cool thoughts. One of those cases, a court poet whose final ode was rumored to be scribbled on the linen covering his frozen feet. Creepy sure. Also, kind of poetic. And speaking of poetic, some tombs featured snow motifs on their tiles. Subtle swirls of white, blue, and silver meant to evoke both winter and eternity. Not always noticeable unless the light hit just right. Historians still argue whether this symbolism was widely understood or just a fashionable flourish of the time. But it wasn't all death and mourning. Step a few paces away from the Gasselhain, and you'll reach the harem courtyard. Quiet, enclosed with latticed balconies and trickling fountains. During summer, these fountains were sometimes packed with snow. Beneath the waterline to cool the space, the women of the palace would dip their fingers in giggling at the sudden chill or drop rose petals to watch them swirl above the melting snow. You imagine one girl, maybe 15, testing a peach slice in the water, squealing when it turns icy. She doesn't know the logistics behind it, the laborers, the packers, the vaults, but she feels the luxury of forgetting the heat. Even here in private snow was magic. Now lean against this carved window, and let me tell you about one of the more bizarre traditions involving snow: dream incubation. Stay with me. In some elite Ottoman circles, especially among mystics and court philosophers, it was believed that sleeping near snow on certain nights could produce more vivid prophetic dreams. So small bowls of snow were placed beneath pillows or beneath the raised floors of sleeping platforms. The colder the surface beneath your bed, the closer your dreams floated to the divine. A real fringe tidbit. One recorded dream involved a rabbit the size of a camel who offered me sherbet from a silver thimble. Another a voice from under the snow telling me to write everything in reverse. These were not guys you invited to game night. Of course not everyone approved. One conservative cleric denounced snow dreams as frivolous meddling with divine temperature, which honestly is a fantastic insult. Historians still argue whether this cold sleep practice was ever truly widespread, or just a trend among a few particularly dramatic palace intellectuals. Still, next time you nap with the AC on full blast and dream of goats playing chess, you'll know who to thank. Let's pivot to something a little more architectural, because just beyond the harem built into the palace's inner wall is one of the strangest relics of all, a snow-watching chamber. At least that's what scholars think it is. A small octagonal room with a domed ceiling, no fireplace, no real furniture, just a built-in marble bench and one narrow glassless window facing north. No clear purpose. But one traveler's diary from 1692 mentions a silent room where snow is watched like a falling prayer. A poetic way to describe a kind of meditative snow observatory. Maybe. We can't be sure. Historians still argue whether it was a meditation cell, a cooling chamber, or just someone's very impractical smoking lounge. But we do know that snow to the Ottomans meant more than refreshment. It meant pausunin. It meant presensum. You feel that here in this strange little space. You imagine a palace scribe or tired advisor coming in after a long day, sitting in the cool quiet, and just watching flakes fall outside. No bureaucracy, no titles, just frozen time. You don't expect to find emotion in snow, but here you are. Let's end this section with one final callback. Remember the snow sherbet sellers from earlier? Well, one of the oldest surviving records of a snow merchant shows his final wish scrawled in his will. Let me be buried with one handful of clean snow wrapped in a saffron cloth. They honored it. Even in death, he wanted the chill. So tonight, as you step through the palace's soft-lit corridors and the last echoes of water drip from hidden gutters, you realize something beautifully silly and brilliantly human. This empire, this colossal machine of power, religion, bureaucracy, and silk-draped splendor, also made room for people who measured their days in melting snowflakes, icy dreams, and cold peaches on hot lips. You pass under an arch where the stone is permanently cool, like it's been touched by snow 1,000 times, and just remembers. From here, your footsteps lead you toward the part of the palace that most visitors never see, the old kitchens. The sprawling heart of Topkapa's culinary operations. Vast, vaulted, and once full of clanging copper, it's quieter now, but the air still tastes faintly of cardamom and char. And here amid pots the size of bathtubs and bread ovens so big you could crawl inside, you find the snow's final performance. Ice in Ottoman gastronomy. Let's start with the obvious, Hamaychu. Sharvetstein. You've sipped them in imagination by now, cool sweet drinks made from rose sour cherry lemon tamarind or quince. But tonight, you get to see how they were actually made cold in an era before Frappuccino machines. Behind the kitchen is a smaller room, half pantry, half shrine. On the floor, insulated bins filled with sawdust and linen where mock-sheet blocks of snow were stored, specifically for cooling drinks. The trick was to chip the snow rapid in cloth and stir it slowly into the sherbet until it dropped to a perfect, refreshing chill. But never too much else, it would turn slushy, and no Ottoman prince wanted a snow slushy with his pistachio baklava. Mainstream fact. Every day, the kitchen's sherbet crew consulted a rotating flavor calendar, which matched drinks to moods, religious observances, and weather. Apricot for Monday's tamarind during fasting hours, cucumber mint after hot baths, and snow turned all of them from pleasant to divine. But the real magic, layered desserts. There's a lesser-known sweet called kar helvası, or snow halva. Think of it as the Ottoman answer to Italian granita. They took lightly sweetened saffron or rose-flavored snow and pressed it into trays, sometimes layering it with crushed nuts or fruit syrup. The texture was flaky, delicate, and made to melt slowly on the tongue. The twist: you couldn't make it unless the snow was clean enough to eat raw. So every batch began with a taste test. Yes, someone's actual job was to eat snow and judge its purity. If it tasted earthy, it was out. If it crunched too much, same deal. Only the softest, fluffiest flakes were used. A fringe detail: there was once a palace scandal involving forged snow desserts. One chef, desperate to impress a visiting vizier, apparently faked a batch of snow halva using chalk shavings and cold water gelled with animal fat. It looked perfect, but tasted like betrayal. The punishment: stripped of title and reassigned to pickle duty. For life. Historians still argue whether this particular story is real or exaggerated to keep young chefs from cutting corners. But let's be honest. It's too delicious not to believe. Now duck down into the cellar. Here you'll find something utterly unexpected. Wine room. But wait, wasn't the empire Islamic? Yes, officially. But the palace kitchen kept a small, guarded collection of imported wines for diplomatic purposes. Christian envoys, foreign rulers, European dignitaries who wouldn't toast with sherbet. Snow was used to chill these bottles, nestled in straw baskets lined with linen. It's a quiet reminder the Ottomans were complicated. Pious, yes, but also pragmatic, especially when it came to impressing someone from Venice who wouldn't shut up about Bordeaux vintages. A little to the left of the wine room, there's a cabinet of strange utensils. Brass strainers, bone-handled spoons, and what looks like a ladle with holes shaped like stars. That it's a sherbet strainer, designed to leave the drink smooth but let a few flakes of snow pass through so the Sultan could sip and feel the cold in each mouthful. There's something childlike about it. You can picture him sprawled on a divan plucking a piece of candied quince from his plate, snow sherbet in hand, completely unbothered by the complexities of empire for exactly 3 minutes. Snow gave moments like that. Fleeting, cold, perfect. Let's rewind to the market for a second. Because what started as palace luxury began trickling into public life. Snow sherbets weren't just for royals. By the late 18th century, street vendors with brass tanks and cloth filters were selling chilled drinks to ordinary citizens, often sweetened with molasses or fermented grape must. On a hot day, a copper clink from the sherbet vendor was the city's version of the ice cream truck. But, and here's the catch, not all vendors could afford real snow, so fakes abounded. Crushed marble, cold spring water with flour for thickness, even lime-chilled sludge passed off as snow. One writer called it an insult to glaciers. Officials cracked down, issuing licenses for snow sellers and raids on counterfeit chillers weren't uncommon. You didn't want to be caught in a snow scam. That could get you dunked in the Bosphorus, figuratively or not. Quirky note, there was a brief but intense fashion trend where noble ladies carried miniature snow scoops as hair accessories. Why, no idea. But there's a portrait in a museum showing a woman with a pearl-studded scoop perched like a crown. Historians still argue whether this was a reference to courtly elegance or just a flex that said, "My sherbet's colder than yours." Now walk with me one last time past the great oven where the walls are blackened by centuries of heat. And consider this. All the planning, the storage, the labor, the secrecy, it all melted into flavor, into fleeting joy, into the crackle of snow crystals against the tongue and the satisfaction of knowing that for a moment you were cooler than the sun. That's what makes this whole thing so delightfully absurd. Empires rise and fall over maps, but this one carved out an entire logistical empire of snow, just so its people could eat something refreshing in summer. Silly. Yes. Brilliant. Also yes. And now, as the last light fades from the kitchen dome and a distant muezzin calls the evening prayer, you realize the Ottomans didn't just store ice. They saved summers one snowflake at a time. There's a rustle of breeze through the garden palms as you leave the kitchens and head toward the palace's outer courtyards. You know now that snow wasn't just a luxury, it was a lifestyle, a symbol, a carefully managed commodity. But here in the public spaces, you start to see how the Ottomans let that icy ingenuity spill over into public life. You step into a wide stone plaza once bustling with soldiers, officials, and petitioners. A fountain gurgles gently at the far end, and just beyond it, shaded by a cedar tree, is a modest-looking kiosk. The kind you might overlook if you didn't know better. But this is a public sherbet stand. Funded by the palace and staffed during the hot months by a dedicated snowman. Not the carrot-nosed kind, but the human kind who received regular deliveries of snow just to serve chilled drinks to passers-by. A mainstream historical fact. By the late 1600s, charitable snow distribution had become a semi-regular event during heat waves or religious festivals. Wealthy patrons, even the Sultan himself, sponsored snow kiosks as public works, seen as both benevolent and blessed. But let's not over-romanticize it. These weren't altruistic hippies giving out snow cones. These were public relations moves, elegant, refreshing, and politically smart. Give a man chilled quince syrup on a 102-degree day, and he'll forget your tax hikes for at least an hour. Now peek under the kiosk's counter. You'll find rows of earthenware cups, stacked upside down. These were soaked in cold water to enhance the chill before sherbet was poured in. Some cups were even glazed with a thin coating of silver. Not just to look fancy, but to conduct cold faster. Because even back then, people wanted maximum refreshment per sip. Let's drift back into the city for a moment. You're walking through a quieter district now with faded storefronts and the occasional mule cart clacking by. And you pass a strange, low building made of heavy stone, no windows, just a thick wooden door. This is a taptatirmon, neighborhood Karhane. A snow house for civilians. Not as grand as the palace's storehouses, but still vital. These were scattered throughout Istanbul and major cities supplied by merchants who, brace yourself, sometimes, raced each other down the mountains to be first to market. One fringe tidbit from the 18th century tells of two rival snow runners who tied sleds behind their donkeys and nearly caused a house street brawl over a delivery delay. Witnesses say they shouted things like, "Your snow's more straw than snow, and you wouldn't know ice if it bit you." Historians still argue whether these stories were real or urban legends passed around tea houses for laughs. But either way, neighborhood snow houses mattered. They sold blocks to shopkeepers, doctors, barbers, and anyone who could afford a cool moment. Which brings us to one last thread. Snow and medicine. Because yes, the Ottomans didn't just eat and drink their ice, they used it to heal. Doctors of the time believed that excessive heat could imbalance the body's humors. The cure: cooling agents. Snow was mixed into poultices used to ease fevers, reduce swelling, and even calm madness. One medical manual recommended placing snow-wrapped cloth on the patient's chest until the tongue no longer burns with invisible fire. Dramatic much. Of course, snow was also used the old-fashioned way, as ice packs. Sprained ankle, apply snow. Nosebleed, snow. Too much pepper in your lentil stew, and now you're hallucinating tulips. Probably more snow. But here's a curious detail. Snow was sometimes blessed. Before use in healing, especially if it came from a pure mountain. Patients believed that holy snow worked faster, melted slower, and carried a kind of sacred frost. One Sufi healer even claimed to have caught a snowflake that whispered and turned it into a charm. Can't confirm the science, but it's got style. Let's return to the palace gates now. The sun is lower, and a thin breeze picks up dust from the courtyard stones. You stand at the outer wall, looking back at everything: the kitchens, the snow vaults, the sherbet kiosk, even the poetic little snow chamber with its lonely window. And suddenly it strikes you. Ottoman ice storage wasn't just about snow. It was about time, about control, about resisting the inevitable melt of seasons, mortality, politics, and decay. They knew snow couldn't last forever. But for a few precious weeks, sometimes even months, they made it last anyway. They did it through infrastructure secrecy ritual and just the right mix of obsessive planning and creative flair. 1,000 men moved mountains so a prince could drink tamarind chilled at noon. Bureaucrats signed parchment orders for 4 mules' worth of north face snow. And peasants in distant hills carved silence from frozen drifts just to keep the machine running. You may laugh now at the absurdity of it, the empire of cold. But don't we do the same? Stock fridges wear down air conditioners, clutch iced coffees like relics. The Ottomans simply took it further, gave it poetry, gave it ceremony, gave it snow names like Yorgan Kara, quilt snow, because it was soft enough to dream under. So when the last sherbet melts and the last snow cellar disappears into the fog of history, what's left? Just this: a memory of coolness on a hot day, a glint of silver in a porcelain cup, A world that for a little while refused to let summer win. Now, breathe. Let your body soften. Let the palace fade behind you. Just listen to that fan hum you turned on earlier. And let's ease gently into the final wind down. You're lying still now. The lights are dim, the story has settled. Outside your window, maybe it's quiet. Maybe there's the distant sound of traffic or a tree rustling, or just the gentle buzz of the room you've grown used to. Either way, the world has slowed down, like snow falling without wind. Steady, soft, familiar. You feel the trace of Ottoman snow still on your skin, somehow impossible, yes, but not unwelcome. The idea of it, the calm of it, the way it turned chaos into chill and turned empires into delicately melting moments. Breathe in slow and deep, and picture it a courtyard blanketed in night. A man wrapped in wool holding a metal scoop. He smiles, tips a bit of snow into a bowl. He's not in a hurry. The stars above him don't blink. Time doesn't pull here. Everything holds its place just for now. Let yourself rest in that image. You've walked through centuries tonight. Tasted sherbets. Watched snow sealed into vaults like treasure. Sat beside dreamers and listened to frozen whispers. And you made it out not just awake, but somehow cooler. So thank you for coming along. No need to think now. Just float. Snow falls even in dreams, and you're part of that now. End of script. Sweet dreams.